The exoskeleton of Matriarch Zalvora had shifted to the absolute black of execution-level authority. Yet, inside the restricted Highspire nursery, the only sound was the rhythmic slap of cheap cardboard against the deck plating. Kalen gripped his plasma rifle, his trainee uniform suddenly feeling too tight. Through the triple-sealed doorway, he stared at a human maintenance worker sitting cross-legged on the floor. Beside the human, the royal heir leaned against a yellow mop bucket. The matriarch raised her primary manipulator. Would you have risked the executioner's blade for an enemy's child? Because he didn't even hesitate. That same sharp scent of ozone and burning plasma. Kalen had first smelled it 17 cycles ago, when Sector 7 hub went dark. On the security monitors, he had watched Elias Thorne force the nursery doors. The evacuation alarms were screaming. Every elite Krell diplomat had already abandoned the Highspire. Elias walked into the empty room, dropped a tool bag, and pulled out a stack of paper rectangles. He methodically counted them, running a thumb over the frayed edges before slipping them into his pocket. The footage remained locked in Kalen's training logs. The Krell Empire operated on a strict transactional philosophy. You protected what provided immediate value. Princess Lyra, suffering from a high-grade environmental fever, offered zero tactical advantage during a catastrophic failure. Her biological guardians had calculated the thermal collapse and fled. Remain the human. Through the grainy feed, Kalen watched the biped bypass the failing environmental controls. The temperature plummeted. Krell physiology required ambient heat to regulate internal systems. Elias stripped off his heavy thermal suit liner. He approached the shivering princess. Kalen remembered his mandibles clicking in disgust at the screen. He officially recorded the incident as a hostile restraint maneuver. The human was clearly using the weighted fabric to suppress the larva, preparing to harvest her resources. Gotta trap the radiant heat. The audio pickup caught Elias muttering. Basic thermal transfer. You're a cold-blooded little thing. My body runs at 37 Celsius. Let's share. He wrapped the liner tightly around Lyra and pulled her against his chest. Kalen flagged the behavior, but the command chain had broken down. Aegis Terminus was a ghost town. 17 days. No emergency rations. Just him. By day 4, the automated nutrition dispensers locked down. Elias ripped the casing off a wall unit with a hydrospanner. He extracted blocks of hardened nutrient paste. He did not consume them himself. Instead, he mixed the chalky substance with condensation gathered from a ruptured cooling pipe, softening the material until the larva could swallow it. Kalen watched the human's physical condition deteriorate. Humans required constant caloric intake to maintain their internal furnaces. Elias was actively starving himself to act as an incubator. Then came the analog log slate. Elias found an old maintenance notebook and began writing. Every hour, he etched crude graphite symbols onto the paper. Kalen assumed it was a complex ransom calculation. The Krell always logged debts. The human was surely tallying the cost of his body heat, preparing an invoice for the Dominion. By day 11, a secondary alarm blared through the nursery. Elias didn't secure an escape route. He just dragged his mop bucket in front of the door, sat down, and started dealing the cards. The timeline snapped back to the present cycle. Kalen lowered his rifle slightly, watching through the breached seal of the high-security door. Sitting cross-legged on the cold metal floor, the human did not even glance up at the heavily armed squad. He simply moistened his thumb and methodically rubbed a smear of dried, gray nutrient paste off the cracked leather cover of his analog log slate. Came the heavy, rhythmic thud of the matriarch's guard entering the sanctuary. The executioner's exoskeleton remained absolute black, the biological indicator of imminent lethal force. Only one penalty did unauthorized entry into the Highspire carry. Identify your transactional demand. Matriarch Zalvora hissed. Her primary manipulators extended, the serrated edges vibrating as she prepared to sever the human's cervical vertebrae. The royal diplomats had abandoned this sector to save themselves, calculating the larva as an acceptable thermal loss. State the price of your interference. Elias finally looked up, squinting at the towering, armored death squad through tired, bloodshot eyes. I just need you to unlock the main maintenance hatch so I can get my mop bucket back. My shift ends in 20 minutes. Kalen stepped past his commander, his ocular sensors scanning the shadowed corner of the nursery. Discarded in a heap lay the heavy thermal liner. Beside it sat the princess. Her respiration was steady. Her core temperature had stabilized at a safe operational level. The realization hit the young guard like a kinetic strike. Human evolutionary biology mandated this reckless behavior. They were a short-lived, fragile species. Yet their pack-bonding reflex forced them to expend their own critical caloric and thermal resources to shelter the vulnerable of completely alien species. Not a hostile restraint maneuver. A cradle. The matriarch snatched the leather-bound book from the human's grease-stained hands. She flipped past 17 agonizing days of fever charts, manual fluid measurements, and frantic physiological observations written in blocky Terran script. The executioner lowered her plasma blade to examine a crumpled page of crude stick figures. Beside the clinical vitals for day 11, a small, messy drawing of a Krell larva with an exaggerated, curving smile covered the margin, a stark contrast to the sterile data. Below it, a handwritten note offered a completely different kind of record. Drew a funny face. She finally stopped crying. Played Go Fish. She won again. They were not ransom tallies. The paper rectangles scattered across the deck plating were just a crude game, utilized to keep a terrified child anchored to reality during the darkest hours of a system collapse. The lowest caste of a lesser civilization had provided the exact invisible foundation the elite Krell protectors had abandoned. Decades shifted the political landscape of Sector 7 Hub. The Riven Accord negotiations stalled for a third consecutive cycle. Across the massive obsidian table, Matriarch Lyra sat opposite the Terran delegation. Into her diplomatic robes she reached. Onto the polished stone, she placed a battered, dog-eared deck of playing cards. Her manipulator tapped the frayed edge of the Queen of Hearts. 3 sectors away, deep inside the ventilation shafts of Aegis Terminus, a gray-haired engineer tightened a plasma conduit. Sparks showered onto the metal grating. He wiped grease from his forehead with a stained rag. The radio beside his toolkit hummed with the live broadcast of the treaty signing.